Today, we dive into the most stupid zoo attacks ever recorded. From a man who forced his arm through a lion fence, to a woman who leaned over crocodile water and told her friends there was nothing there. But first, we start in a metropolitan zoo, where a videographer climbed a safety railing and learned the barrier he called all for show was the only thing keeping him alive. It was July 18, 2017, and the midday heat pressed down on an aging metropolitan zoo in Southeast Asia, later identified as a non-accredited facility with outdated safety standards, where the air carried the thick, humid weight of the tropics mixed with the faint smell of animal musk and concrete. The enclosures were old, built in an era where barriers favored aesthetics over containment, and the pathways between exhibits were worn smooth by decades of foot traffic. Families moved slowly through the grounds, pausing at each exhibit, children pressing their faces against glass. The atmosphere was relaxed, almost lazy. Aaron Velez was 24 years old, a freelance videographer who had built a modest following online by chasing content others avoided. He had traveled to Southeast Asia with a small group of friends, and the zoo had been a spontaneous addition to the itinerary. Aaron had a pattern his friends expected. He pushed further than everyone else, treating warning signs as suggestions. Earlier that afternoon, he had tapped on exhibit glass, leaned over railings, and tried to provoke reactions from animals. He said more than once the barriers were for show, that the danger people imagined was mostly theater. The Bengal tiger enclosure was a wide concrete and rock structure, with a visible moat and a safety railing set well before the boundary. Warning signage was posted clearly along the approach, instructing visitors not to cross. The tiger, a large adult male, had been resting in partial shade near the far wall, indifferent to the steady stream of visitors. Aaron had been filming near the railing when he climbed over it. A bystander called out immediately, warning him to get back. Aaron laughed. His friends kept their cameras raised. He stepped onto the sloped concrete beyond the railing, dusty and unstable. A second voice warned him again. He turned toward his friends, told them to relax, that he was fine. He moved lower, trying to find a better angle. Bengal tigers are among the largest wildcats on Earth, with adult males commonly exceeding 400 pounds and measuring over 9 feet from nose to tail. They are ambush predators built for explosive short-range acceleration, capable of closing distance in seconds. Their forelimbs can knock a full-grown animal off its feet, and their jaws target the throat and neck to cut off airflow and blood supply. A tiger does not lose those instincts. It waits. The tiger had been resting. Then Aaron moved lower on the slope and the animal's posture changed. Its head lifted, its eyes locked onto the movement below the railing. Aaron's foot found loose dust and slipped. He stumbled forward, and the distance that had felt safe a moment earlier was gone. The tiger closed the ground instantly. A forelimb strike hit Aaron's upper body, driving him onto the concrete. Before he could rise, the tiger's jaws closed around the back of his neck and shoulder. Aaron's hands came up, but there was no footing, no leverage. The tiger reinforced the attack with its weight, forelimbs pinning his torso as its jaws tightened and shifted toward the throat. It maintained a sustained hold with short, forceful lateral shaking. Aaron remained conscious briefly, struggling without leverage. Within roughly 20 to 40 seconds, reduced blood flow caused disorientation as carotid compression took effect. His movements became uncoordinated. With the airway compressed, oxygen intake dropped sharply. Over the next minute, hypoxia led to progressive loss of control. His resistance weakened into reflexive motion, then faded. The tiger maintained the bite. Only after about 1 to 2 minutes, when resistance ceased, did it reduce force while keeping contact. It shifted and began to pull, attempting to drag the body toward the enclosure wall. Shouting from nearby visitors disrupted the behavior, and the tiger paused, remaining over the body instead of continuing. Aaron no longer responded. The cause of death was asphyxiation and vascular occlusion from the sustained throat bite. Zoo staff responded within minutes, using noise and distraction to move the tiger away. Emergency services arrived shortly after, but there was nothing to be done. Aaron was pronounced dead at the scene. Local authorities launched a formal review of enclosure safety standards across the facility. The tiger was not destroyed, with officials concluding the animal had responded to a direct intrusion and behaved consistently with natural predatory instinct. Public reaction was swift and divided, many expressing grief while others pointed to the warnings Aaron had ignored. His friends, who filmed the entire sequence, were questioned. Aaron Velez crossed a barrier that had kept every other visitor safe that day, and a Bengal tiger did exactly what it was built to do. For Jaron crossed, there would be no railing to climb, just a gap in a fence he decided was an invitation, and an African lion that had been watching him the entire time. It was August 3rd, 2017, and the late morning sun beat down on an urban zoo in southern Africa, where the air carried the dry, mineral scent of packed earth and sun-warmed concrete. The facility was aging despite appearing modern, its enclosures designed with layered barriers, outer fencing, buffer zones, and inner containment structures that created clear separation between visitors and animals. Some sections showed subtle wear that passed unnoticed without close inspection, especially along high-stress joints and older weld points. Families moved along the paved walkways, keeping a comfortable distance from the barriers as the signage instructed. It was the kind of place that felt controlled and safe, a curated version of the wild. Jaron Crost was 28 years old, a self-described thrill-seeker who treated rules as obstacles designed for people with less confidence than himself. He had arrived at the zoo that morning with his partner, framing the visit as casual, but his behavior said otherwise. He had spent the morning leaning into enclosures, provoking reactions from animals, and dismissing warnings as excessive caution. He claimed the animals were conditioned to humans, and that real danger was overblown. His partner grew visibly uncomfortable. Jaron had a camera and a clear intention to get footage no one else would. The African lion enclosure was a large open habitat with a multi-layered barrier system. The outer fence was solid and clearly marked, but Jaron had been studying it. He noticed a section where the gap between posts was slightly wider, likely from long-term structural fatigue and outdated compliance standards, possibly worsened by repeated stress and minor ground shifting over time. For Jaron, it registered as an opportunity. His partner warned him. He dismissed it, saying the lions were too far away, and raised his camera. African lions are apex predators, with females weighing between 265 and 395 pounds, and males exceeding 420 pounds. Lionesses are built for explosive acceleration and can close distance faster than human reaction allows. Their killing method is precise, jaws clamping around the throat, or muzzle to collapse the windpipe or cut off blood flow. A lion's claws can exceed 3 inches, and their bite force can crush bone. In captivity, those instincts remain unchanged. Jaron pushed his arm through the wider gap, then his shoulder. He leaned further, watching his phone screen instead of the enclosure. In the grass, a lioness lifted her head. She had been resting, blending into the dry vegetation, her focus locked onto the exposed limb. She rose, body low, and approached silently, each step controlled and deliberate. Jaron was still watching his screen when she accelerated. The lioness covered the distance instantly. Her jaws closed around his forearm with crushing force, slamming him into the fence as she pulled. He tried to pull back, but the motion forced his torso deeper into the gap, twisting his shoulder and chest further through the opening. The lioness did not release. She clamped down and held. As resistance continued, the lioness shifted her bite higher along the shoulder and neck as she pulled, seeking a more controlling grip. Her grip tightened as she anchored her weight. Forelimbs braced against the fence. Claws tore as she adjusted without letting go, the damage compounding over time. Jaron struggled, but each movement worsened the injury. The fence trapped him as the lioness continued the mauling, crushing, tearing, pulling with sustained force. Damage escalated rapidly to the upper torso and throat area, where compressive force and tearing became immediately life-threatening, overtaking the earlier arm injuries. Jaron's movements weakened gradually as shock, blood loss, and compressive trauma set in. His partner screamed, but there was no way to intervene. The lioness maintained her hold for an extended period, her bite unwavering, before releasing only when external disturbance approached. By the time she let go, Jaron was unresponsive. The cause of death was catastrophic trauma to the neck and upper torso, including likely airway compromise and major vascular damage, compounded by sustained crushing and tearing forces through the fence. Zoo staff responded quickly, using vehicles and noise to drive the lioness away. Emergency services arrived within minutes, but the injuries were not survivable. Jaron was pronounced dead at the scene. Authorities opened an investigation into the enclosure and monitoring protocols. Early findings pointed to fencing that no longer met updated safety standards. The lioness was not destroyed, as her behavior was deemed natural. The zoo announced a full structural review, and public reaction was sharp. Jaron Crost found a gap in a fence and treated it as an invitation, and an African lion answered in the only language she knew. For Vita Splint, there would be no barrier at all. Just open ground, a wild elephant herd, and a vehicle door she chose to open anyway. It was April 22nd, 2015, and the late afternoon sun stretched long golden light across the bush roads of Kruger National Park, casting deep shadows through the mopane trees and turning the dry grass a warm amber. The air was still and dry, carrying the faint scent of dust and wild sage. Safari vehicles moved slowly along the dirt tracks, windows down, engines idling. The park's rules were posted at every entrance gate and repeated on signage along every major route. Visitors were to remain inside their vehicles at all times. The bush was not a zoo. There were no barriers, no buffer zones. The animals that moved through Kruger were wild and entirely indifferent to human presence in any form other than threat or opportunity. Vida Splint was 34 years old, a travel blogger who had built her platform on documenting experiences that looked more immersive and daring than what other travelers were willing to attempt. She had arrived at Kruger with her family as part of a broader Southern Africa itinerary, and the self-drive safari had been her idea from the beginning. She had a camera, a large social media following, and a well-established habit of pushing past boundaries that other visitors respected without question. Earlier that day, she had exited the vehicle at 2 previous stops, brushing off concern from her family each time. She had said more than once that the danger was exaggerated, and that as long as you moved slowly and stayed aware, the animals would leave you alone. The vehicle had stopped along a track where a herd of African bush elephants had gathered near a dry riverbed ahead. Other cars remained stationary, windows up, engines quiet. Several adult females moved slowly through the scrub, and at least one calf was visible near the center of the group. A large female stood at the edge of the herd, partially turned toward the road. Vida opened the vehicle door. Her family urged her not to step out. She stepped out anyway, camera in hand, and began walking toward the herd. She stopped once to adjust her camera, then continued forward. She stopped again, closer now, trying to frame the calf within the shot. The large female at the edge of the herd turned fully toward her. African bush elephants are the largest land animals on Earth, with adult females weighing between 6,000 and 8,000 pounds, and adult males exceeding 13,000 pounds. Despite their size, they are capable of reaching speeds of up to 25 miles per hour in a charge. A female elephant protecting a calf is among the most dangerous animals a person can encounter in the African bush. When a matriarch commits to a charge, she commits completely, and the impact of several tons of animal at full speed is instantly and catastrophically fatal. The large female spread her ears wide. Another vehicle on the track sounded its horn in warning. Vida did not turn back. She kept the camera raised, still adjusting her position. The elephant charged. There was no mock display, no hesitation. The animal dropped her head and accelerated from a standing position, covering the distance with terrifying speed. Vida turned and attempted to run, but the gap was too large and the elephant too fast. The impact came from behind. The elephant's full momentum struck Vida and drove her into the ground. She landed hard on the packed dirt, and the elephant followed immediately. A front foot came down on Vida's torso. Ribs collapsed instantly, the chest wall driven inward under several tons of moving mass. Internal organs ruptured from the compression. A second stomp landed across the upper abdomen, pushing and rolling the body several feet along the track. The elephant continued forward before turning briefly, ears still spread, then moved back toward the herd. Vida lay motionless on the track. Death resulted from massive blunt force trauma and the complete destruction of the thoracic cavity and internal organs. Park rangers reached the scene within minutes, alerted by other vehicles in the area. Emergency services were dispatched, but arrived to find nothing could be done. Vida was pronounced dead at the scene. South African National Parks authorities launched a formal investigation into the incident. The elephant herd was not disturbed or relocated. Officials concluded the animal had responded defensively to a perceived threat near her calf, entirely consistent with natural elephant protective instinct. Vida's family, who witnessed the attack from inside the vehicle, were provided with trauma support services. Public response was extensive, with many expressing sorrow while others noted that the park's rules existed precisely to prevent what had unfolded on that track. Vida Splint stepped out of a vehicle in the African bush and discovered that wild elephants do not distinguish between a camera and a threat. For Corby Glass, there would be no open bush, no dirt track, just a zoo enclosure, a barrier he had been warned repeatedly not to climb, and a silverback gorilla watching every move he made. It was September 9th, 2018. And the late morning crowds were already thick at a large metropolitan zoo in the United States, where the air smelled of popcorn and cut grass, and the distant calls of exotic birds carried across the open pathways. Families moved between exhibits in the warm September sun, the atmosphere relaxed and unhurried. The chimpanzee enclosure was a substantial habitat designed to replicate dense vegetation and rocky terrain of Central Africa, with a barrier system that included a wide outer railing and a significant drop into a moat-like enclosure below. Signage was posted clearly along the perimeter, The barrier was not subtle. It was not easy to misread. Corby Smith was 19 years old, and he had arrived that morning with a group of friends with a specific goal in mind. He was not there for the animals. He was there for content. He had spent months building a social media presence around stunts and boundary-pushing behavior, identifying the enclosure as the backdrop for attention online. He had made multiple attempts to climb the outer barrier earlier that morning, drawing warnings from visitors and at least one zoo staff member who had instructed him directly to step down. His friends kept their phones raised, treating each warning as part of the entertainment. Corby said more than once that the footage was going to blow up. He focused on the camera angle, not what was on the other side. Zoo staff member issued another direct warning as Corby climbed again. He laughed it off and pulled himself onto the inner ledge, balancing above the drop. He adjusted his position, phone raised, leaning for a better angle. He almost lost his footing once and caught himself. Rather than stepping back, he leaned further. His footing failed. Common chimpanzees are highly intelligent, social primates capable of extreme aggression during territorial or perceived threat situations. Adult males can exceed 100 pounds, but possess strength disproportionate to their size, with powerful jaws and a tendency to bite and tear soft tissue. Attacks escalate quickly into sustained mauling. Corby dropped into the enclosure and hit the ground hard. The nearest adult male chimpanzee reacted instantly, vocalizing sharply as others turned, then charged. He closed the distance in seconds before launching onto Corby. The chimpanzee grabbed his arm and shoulder, biting down and pulling while using its limbs to control him. Corby screamed as he was dragged across the rocky floor. His head struck the ground hard on the first impact. Without releasing, it repositioned its bite, tearing while maintaining grip, pulling him in short, forceful bursts rather than a directed drag. A second chimpanzee approached, striking and grabbing in quick, erratic bursts before circling back. The first chimp drove Corby down again, continuing to bite and pull. There was no pause. Only sustained mauling, biting, shaking, and jerking movements in rapid succession. His body twisted under the force, his head striking rock repeatedly at irregular angles. The chimp continued pulling and repositioning him across the enclosure floor, movements disrupted by shouting from above. The outcome was driven by speed and relentless aggression. Not a single blow. Severe trauma accumulated, deep lacerations, crushing bites, and repeated blunt force impacts to the head. Corby did not get back up or regain. Coordinated movement. The cumulative trauma left him unresponsive. The chimpanzee remained briefly nearby, agitated and vocalizing, before retreating as noise increased. Corby did not move as staff began to intervene. Death was later attributed to severe traumatic brain injury, combined with extensive blood loss and shock from sustained mauling and repeated impact with the enclosure surface. Zoo staff initiated emergency protocols immediately, moving the chimpanzees to a holding area. Emergency services entered and reached Corby, but he was unresponsive. He was pronounced dead at the scene. Local authorities conducted a formal investigation, reviewing footage that captured the sequence, including prior warnings. The chimpanzees were not destroyed, with officials determining the animals had responded to a direct intrusion consistent with natural behavior. The zoo announced a review of barrier heights and visitor monitoring. His friends who had filmed the incident were questioned. Public reaction was intense and divided, with grief for a teenager's death alongside anger at the circumstances. Corby Glass climbed a barrier for a few seconds of footage and never climbed back. Vida Splint had walked away from a vehicle in the African bush and paid the same price. For Rhea Snoke, there would be no enclosure to fall into, no railing to climb, just still water, a secondary barrier she leaned past anyway, and something waiting beneath the surface that had not moved in hours. It was January 12th, 2016, and the midday heat pressed down on an open safari park in the Middle East, where the air shimmered above sun-baked pathways, and the landscape had been sculpted to replicate the river systems of sub-Saharan Africa. Broad-leafed plants and reeds clustered along the banks, and the surface of the crocodile enclosure sat flat and dark beneath the glare of the afternoon sun. Visitors moved along elevated walkways and fenced viewing platforms positioned above the water, designed to give a clear sightline into the habitat while maintaining a safe distance from the edge. Warning signage was posted at every approach point. Danger, keep distance from the water. The barriers were layered, an outer fence followed by a secondary railing closer to the water's edge, beyond which no visitor was permitted to go. Rhea Snoke was 26 years old, and she had arrived at the park that afternoon with a group of friends, camera in hand and a confidence around animals that had never been tested by anything genuinely dangerous. She had spent enough time watching wildlife documentaries to believe she understood predator behavior in a practical sense, and that belief had shaped her behavior throughout the day. At multiple exhibits earlier in the afternoon, she had leaned past safety barriers, dismissing concern from her friends each time. She had repeated a specific theory more than once, that a motionless crocodile was a safe crocodile. That stillness meant disengagement. Her friends had grown uneasy as the afternoon progressed, but Rhea moved through the park with the ease of someone who had already decided nothing was going to happen. The crocodile viewing platform overlooked a wide, shallow water feature where several Nile crocodiles were visible, some basking on the far bank, others partially submerged. The surface was almost completely still. Rhea moved toward the secondary railing at the platform's edge. A friend told her that was close enough. The platform edge sat less than 2 meters above the waterline, and by leaning past the inner railing, Rhea reduced that gap even further, placing her arm within realistic striking distance of anything directly below. Rhea leaned further over the railing, extending her arm toward the water below, trying to see movement beneath the surface. She told her friends there was nothing there. Nile crocodiles are among the most dangerous predators on Earth, with large adults reaching 16 feet and weighing over 1,500 pounds. Their hunting strategy is built entirely on patience and concealment, capable of remaining motionless for extended periods, while monitoring movement above through sensory systems that detect vibration, pressure, and shadow with extraordinary precision. Their strike is explosive and vertical, covering short distances in a fraction of a second. Once the jaws close, bite force exceeds 5,000 pounds per square inch, sufficient to crush bone instantly. Escape from an established grip is not a realistic outcome. Below the surface, directly beneath the platform, a crocodile had been waiting. The water above showed nothing. No ripple, no shadow, no indication of anything beneath. Rhea's arm was extended over the railing. Her weight shifted forward, her attention on the far bank. The surface exploded. The crocodile launched vertically from directly below, its jaws closing around Rhea's forearm before she had any capacity to react. The bite was immediate and total, crushing bone and tissue in the same instant. Instead of holding position, the crocodile immediately dropped back and surged away from the edge, using its full body weight to drag her forward. She grabbed for the barrier with her free hand, but could not hold it. Her body went over the edge and into the water within seconds. She disappeared beneath the surface almost immediately. The crocodile did not pause or reposition. It pulled her fully underwater first, where control is absolute. The animal then initiated a death roll, its body rotating violently while maintaining its grip. The rotation tore through the shoulder joint and surrounding tissue as water filled her lungs. The primary fatal mechanism became rapid drowning during submersion, compounded by severe rotational trauma. The rolling continued briefly before the crocodile stabilized its hold and dragged her farther from the platform. Her body surfaced once, face down and unresponsive, before being pulled under again and moved toward deeper water. Death resulted from drowning combined with catastrophic structural damage caused by the rolling motion and initial bite. Park staff responded immediately, clearing the platform and contacting emergency services. A recovery operation launched that afternoon continued into the following day. Park authorities initiated a full investigation into barrier design and warning signage across the facility. The crocodile was not destroyed, with officials determining the attack was consistent with natural predatory behavior. The park suspended crocodile viewing access pending a structural review of all water-adjacent platforms. Rhea's friends, who witnessed the attack from the platform, were treated for acute psychological trauma. Public reaction was swift, with many expressing horror at the speed of what had unfolded, while others pointed to the repeated moments throughout the afternoon where a different decision would have produced a different outcome.